Have you ever thought to yourself, I'm tired of doing damage, I just want to launch Sinecure off a cliff? Well, then I've got a pact for you. Mora's Hand is a pact that was added to Soulframe along with Factions in Preludes 9. It is currently a rank up reward for rank 5 in Kith of Kings, which is quite a grind, so of course we have to ask, is it worth it? No. As much as I would love to try to make an argument for why Mora's Hand is actually fire, it's just not, and I'm not going to spend a whole video trying to act like there's some kind of suspense here. It's a fine pact against low-level enemies, but the almost complete lack of virtue scaling makes it woefully underpowered at higher levels, and by the time you have enough standing to get Mora's Hand, you're going to want a pact that's effective at higher levels. I'm still going to go through all the abilities and upgrades and talk about what they do, but instead of giving you a build for this pact, I want to look at the potential hidden in Mora's Hand, what I learned about targeting while testing it, and what a few balance changes could mean for its future. So let's start with the pact abilities. The first ability you get with Mora's Hand is Ignis Roth. This sends out streaks of fire that each deal damage to enemies they hit. It also creates an area of burning ground with a fixed range, which deals damage and stagger to enemies within it, but does not light enemies on fire. As far as I can tell, no aspect of this ability scales with any virtue, but it's hard to know for sure because the damage dealt from the ground AoE does not show any numbers. The second ability you unlock with Mora's Hand is Ember. This is a buff you apply to yourself, and its duration scales with your spirit. When you get hit while this buff is active, the damage dealt to you will be converted into an AoE attack, which will also set enemies on fire. You do still take the damage though. The cooldown mechanics for Ember are very strange. To summarize, the more spirit you have, the longer the buff lasts, and the longer the cooldown is. Taking points in Akin will cause the cooldown to get shorter, but it will also cause you to wait longer for the cooldown to start. The end result is that Akin has no practical effect. The total uptime and downtime stays exactly the same for all values of spirit that I tested. Why DE went to such trouble to create this complex yet ineffectual cooldown mechanic is very confusing to me, especially given the complete lack of courage scaling. Future Sarah here. This is the part where I'm supposed to tell you all about Inferno, Mora's Hand's third ability. Inferno used to deal a fixed 20 damage to enemies it hit, and an additional 20 damage to enemies that were already on fire when it hit them. But while I was gathering footage for this video, I started to notice something very strange. Sometimes Inferno deals 20 damage, but sometimes it doesn't deal any damage, or at least none with visible numbers, and sometimes it just fully kills the target it hits. I have no idea what's going on here, but if I figure it out before I have to upload this video, you'll hear from Future Sarah with an update. Future Sarah here. I did not figure this out entirely, but I think at least part of what's going on is that enemies can get stuck when they get ragdolled, and when that happens, the game just gives up and decides they're dead. So that's fun. Anyway, for the purposes of this video, let's just say Inferno is bugged. So in all of these abilities, the only virtue scaling we see is the unusual spirit scaling of Ember. We heard in DevStream 9 that the intent is for courage, spirit, and grace to affect ability strength, duration, and range, so we've got to assume that the virtue scaling for this pact just isn't working yet. There are certainly other pact abilities that don't scale from all three virtues, but it's a bit unclear if they're just not supposed to scale or if the scaling is still a work in progress, and they usually scale with at least one virtue. With Mora's Hand, however, the lack of scaling has to be unintentional, since 2 out of 3 abilities just don't scale with anything at all. Ember's AoE damage at least scales with the damage you take, and the burn proc does make your Inferno hit harder, but this still feels very weak against higher level enemies, and Ember's lack of any incoming damage mitigation makes it very risky to use. This means we have to look at Mora's Hand as even more of a work in progress than anything else in this beautiful alpha. So with that in mind, let's consider how these abilities would work if courage scaling weren't broken. Ignis Roth has the potential to provide an excellent combination of AoE damage and crowd control. I think the animation is a bit long for this, especially since you need to use it in melee range, but if the damage had courage scaling, I think this would be a great ability. I do think the dot tick and the direct damage from the streaks of fire need to have different scaling formulas, and it's weird to me that this dot doesn't count as being on fire. Of all of Mora's Hand's abilities, this is the one I would most expect to apply burning, and yet it is the only one that doesn't. I think the burning effect could be removed from Ember, and that could deal a wave of stagger instead, which would make more sense for its explosive animation, and then Ignis Roth could truly set enemies on fire. Up until DevStream 9, I was convinced that Ember needed some damage mitigation baked into it, but after seeing the health regain mechanic we're getting in Preludes 11, I'm not so sure. Ember definitely incentivizes you to take damage so you can get that big AoE blast, and being able to regain your health in melee combat will make this feel a lot more practical. I do still think Ember should give some additional buff to the player, but maybe something that enhances the new melee regain mechanic, like increasing the amount of health you can regain or lengthening the amount of time you have to regain it. I love the concept of Inferno, but either the casting animation or the projectile need to be sped up. Having both of them be as slow as they are now feels very clunky and awkward to me. I don't think they should both be faster because that might make it a bit too strong once it gets courage scaling, but one or the other definitely needs a boost. Unfortunately, even courage scaling isn't going to help Mora's hand's pact upgrades. Hungry Flame makes your weapons deal more damage for a while after you've been lit on fire, but this is such a niche situation, it's not really worth investing points in. I also just don't find that the damage bonus I get is worth the amount of damage I take from the burning. I get the vibe DE was going for here, but it's just not practical. If Hungry Flame also made you immune to burning damage, then I could see it as a fun extra perk, even if being set on fire is still relatively rare. Smolder, on the other hand, would be great if you could control it. This upgrade causes your targeted enemy to take damage over time that slowly increases until they burst into flames. Unfortunately, Smolder requires the target lock system to have recognized your target, and our control over who we are targeting is still fairly unreliable. In fact, testing Smolder for this video has given me a much better understanding of how Soulframe's targeting system actually works. As you can see here, targeting an enemy at range with the bow does not trigger Smolder even if you see the little card appear over your target, which means this card is not a 100% accurate indicator of who your character is locked onto, or if you're locked onto anything at all. It is mostly accurate, but the card can become active before you get inside the lock-on range, and stays active even after you've moved outside the lock-on range, and in those cases it does not indicate a lock. Parry and Perfect Dodge both activate the lock-on system, presumably to enable riposte and Spectre strikes, which rely on the lock-on system to work. You can see here that Smolder doesn't activate until I dodge this attack, at which point the Perfect Dodge registers this enemy as my target and Smolder begins its tick timer. I also noticed that blocking towards an enemy does effectively switch your target, provided you're within the lock-on range, but the game won't hold that target until you pick a new one. For example, taking damage will usually switch your target to whoever hit you. Consequently, it can be very difficult to maintain your target lock on a single enemy in a group fight. It seems like the game is constantly trying to guess who you want to be fighting. You can force it to choose a specific target by blocking, but as soon as you stop blocking, it will start guessing again. I'm not at all certain how this guessing works, but it seems like parry, perfect dodge, blocking, and taking damage will all create a lock. An imperfect dodge will sometimes drop your lock, as will moving away. The range you have to be in to keep your lock seems like it might be affected by which direction your character is facing, but I'm not entirely sure on that one. Attack inputs combined with directional inputs as a key combo can change your lock, but those inputs are unreliable for me, and after hours of testing, I still don't understand why. Sometimes my target switches immediately, but sometimes I have to whiff in the wrong direction a few times before my target actually switches. There must be some other aspect of targeting that I'm missing here. If you have any theories, share them in the comments. So yeah, this whole system is incredibly complex in ways it really does not need to be. The lock system probably feels like guessing to me because there are just too many potential inputs that can change my target lock, and all those different systems end up clashing with one another. I do understand why parry and perfect dodge need to change your locked target in order for riposte and Spectre strike to work, but I wish that I could hard lock a target until it dies or until I move outside the lock-on range, something like a hold lock keybind. Aside from making melee combat in general feel much better, this would also make Smolder much more reliable and actually quite strong. The burst at the end of Smolder's building tick deals AoE damage and sets enemies on fire. This would be an amazing upgrade if we had better control over targeting. If you're someone who struggles with Soulframe's targeting system, then I actually recommend getting Mora's Hand and playing around with Smolder a bit. The tick animation makes it much easier to tell who your character is locked onto, and gives you an instant indication of when your target lock has been dropped. This makes melee combat way more comfortable, even with the system we currently have. So perhaps the combat improvement needed here is just a better target lock indicator. So, should you grind your Kith of Kings faction to buy Mora's Hand? Well, yes, to increase your envoy's rank if nothing else, but this pact is sure to be quite strong in the future when its scaling gets fixed. In the meanwhile, Midrath has some really beautiful seaside cliffs that are perfect for the Sinecure space program. If you enjoyed this video, please help it out with a like. What do you think of Mora's hand or of Soulframe's target lock system? Let me know in the comments. And until next time, happy hunting!